Welcome to this Workforce Wednesday webinar. My name is Kirsten Bayer, and I'm with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. And I will be your moderator and technical support for today's session. So welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon and spending your afternoon with us. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be up on our Workforce Academy website, and it will also be up on Illinois WorkNet. The recording typically takes about 48 working hours to edit it and edit closed captioning for accessibility reasons. So please allow for that working time for myself and my team to get the recording up on our website and on Illinois WorkNet's website. We do have the PowerPoint slides available for you today to directly download. I put those in the chat if you entered a couple minutes early, but I'm going to go ahead and put the link to them in the chat here right now. So I just put that in the chat to everybody. So you should be able to download that. I went ahead and opened the chat, so feel free to say good afternoon to us, and we will pose any questions, comments, or concerns to the chat box or the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar. So please utilize those for any questions or comments or concerns. And then at the end of the webinar, we will have time for Q&A, and you can raise your virtual Zoom hand and I will unmute you and you can ask a question to Jim live during the live Q&A at the end of the session. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone who's saying good afternoon in the chat. If you would like to go to the next slide for me, Jim, before we get started with the legislatively mandated follow-up services presentation.
All right, now it's not wanting to let me go forward for some reason.
Oh,
what the heck's going on here?
Well, while Jim figures that out, a couple more housekeeping items. Okay, yay. So again, this is my email. Feel free to reach out to me if you need to contact me following the session for any information. I'm happy to support any of the attendees on today. And you can go to the next slide for me, Jim. And then tomorrow you will receive a follow-up survey and a follow-up email, and that will have the URL to our website where the recording and presentation are housed at, as well as a follow-up survey regarding today's webinar. And if you would like to see any other future topics on Workforce Wednesday webinars, I am a part of the WIOA Professional Development Committee, and we do look at our feedback surveys. Quarterly, we compile all of the results from the feedback surveys and use the information to plan, edit, and make sure that we're really giving the system what they want in terms of professional development. So I'm going to do our beginning polls, which is the slide that Jim has up now. You should be able to see both of them launched, and you should be able to answer them now. The first one is, where's your local area at today? And the second one is, which partner do you best represent? Most of you, I'm assuming, are joining us from Title I, since this is a Title I focused webinar. But we do appreciate the rest of you joining us, a couple of from Title III and IV as well, and some other state or local Workforce Innovation Board members. So welcome, everyone. Thank you. I see you participating. And we have a good span across the state, actually. We have pretty even numbers from Chicago, Northern Illinois, Central, and Southern Illinois as well. And even one person who's joining us statewide. So awesome. Thank you. I'm going to give a couple more seconds here to answer the polls. And these are just for our analytical purposes. So we do appreciate you answering these. If you've ever joined a Workforce Wednesday webinar before, you probably have done these a million times. So we do appreciate your participation. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end that. I'll share the results so you all can see maybe some of your neighbors on the webinar today who are joining you. And a lot of people are saying which LWIA they're in the chat. And so we appreciate that as well. Thank you. And then Jim, you can go to the next slide and move forward to your presentation. I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Kirsten. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Potts. I'm with Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity in Springfield. My primary responsibility is WIOA eligibility. So some of you might have participated in either virtual classes or in-person classes. When I've done the in-person classes, I've done a block on WIOA follow-up, but this one's been more enhanced. For this presentation today, I've partnered up and the folks with performance management, Mark Burgess and Paula Berry, as well as with policy manager Laura Dom, have done much of the heavy lifting to create this presentation today. One of the things about today's session, it won't be getting into the specifics of any management information system. We're not going to be getting into IWDS or into Career Connect, the screens there. It's strictly about the legislatively, as well as state and your local policies around follow-up and the requirements. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. There will be a version 2 that's going to be held on next Tuesday, the May 9th, and that's going to get more into the systems where we'll have screen prints demonstrating enrollment follow-up and case noting and things like that under both Career Connect for those folks in LWIA 7, as well as IWDS for others that utilize IWDS as their system of record. We're fortunate that next week I'm going to have a representative, Christy Savali, with the partnership. She's going to co-host with me and cover the Career Connect slides. So you can look forward to seeing her and I next week. What we're going to do today is the objectives is to explain the federal and state guidance on Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act legislatively mandated follow-up services for participants under WIOA. We're going to define the requirements follow-up activities for both the adult title as well as dislocated worker and youth. It's really important to understand that there's different requirements for an adult and dislocated worker as compared to a youth in many aspects of WIOA, including follow-up, and we'll make sure to pass on that. And then we're going to apply the knowledge of the services and activities considered follow-up for adults, dislocated workers, and youth participants. This might look familiar, this slide, for those of you who participated in the WIOA service matrix trainings that Laura Dom, Mark Burgess, and Paula Berry had conducted. They did a whole series of it. And follow-up is a service that's reported through the portal. That all clients, all youth must have follow-up. We're going to really get in depth about follow-up today. Past, and those cover all the other services other than follow-up. The federal guidance, there's a ton of federal guidance about follow-up. It starts out with the legislation itself, the WIOA Act that came out way back in 2014. It was effective July 1st, 2015. And then there was rules. How it happens is the legislation comes out and then they send it out for comments, and then they use that to build rules. And then there's a bunch of guidance. For those of you who might not be familiar with the federal guidance, often it comes in what's called TEGLs, Training and Employment Guidance Letters. So there's a TEGL 1916 that provides guidance on the adult and dislocated worker. If you work with the adult and dislocated worker titles and you're not familiar with TEGL 1916, I'd highly encourage you to get a copy and stick your nose into it, because there's a lot of great information beyond just about follow-up, but about everything dealing with an adult and dislocated worker. And then there's a youth TEGL 2116 that does the same thing, but for the adult title and for the youth title. And then one of the things about TEGL 2116, they put out a change 1 to that in July of 2021. But all it was about was how to determine low income due to a youth living in a high poverty area based on the census. So it wasn't a ton of additional information. Then you got some TEGLs for performance, TEGL 1418, aligning performance accountability, reporting definitions, and policies across workforce employment and training programs. And then TEGL 1016, which is the performance accountability guidance for the WIOA acts. And this is for all WIOA acts, kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, the core programs. And then just recently, DOL in March of 2023 has put out TEGL 0922. if you work with the youth program, if you're not familiar with that, you definitely want to get a copy of Teagle 0922. There's a lot of information well beyond follow-up, but there's a lot of really good information there.
Jim,
yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we have a lot of people in the chat saying that your audio is going in and out.
Okay.
I'm not experiencing that, but I'm not sure if you just want to call in just in case. But to all the attendees, you can turn on your closed captioning as well. And while Jim is calling in, do you have the phone number accessible, Jim?
Well, let's try this before I call in. Let's see if I just move closer and see if that helps.
Yeah. And then you have your camera off now too, so that will help your connectivity as well.
Yeah, so let's just see, because what I've experienced calling in, we're in a really old building here, downtown Springfield, and it seems like when I call in, it's really tough connections also. So
Okay.
my hope is that this works. So what I'll do is get close as I can to my screen. That's why I shut the camera off, so you don't like to see right up next to my face here.
Yeah, that sounds a lot better. Everyone's saying it sounds a lot better in the chat. So
good.
great.
All right. It's a good thing you don't have a visual. I'm like literally hunched over my screen here. So on this slide that I've got up next, it's about the state policies. And here's some exciting news about the WIOA follow-up state policies. There are going to be some brand new coming out real soon. We hope to have it out for today's meeting. Everything in this PowerPoint's addressed towards the state policies that's going to be coming out. But currently we have Chapter 4, Section 3 about follow-up, and then there's Chapter 4, Section 3.1, adult and dislocated worker, and then Chapter 4, Section 3.2 for the youth. And those are going to be numbered the same, I'm pretty sure. But again, those should be coming out within the next week, the updated that will match right along with the presentation I'm giving today. And then you also have some other state policies, the one on co-enrollment and exiting. And then also the policy on career planning that was originally out. It came out in December of 2021. And then they just updated it. When I say they, the policy folks just updated the career planning policy in March of 2023. So that's the state policies that go in line with this presentation. And then now we're going to move on to speak about the importance of the local guidance. What happens is under the WIOA legislation, the feds said that all states and then local areas must have their own follow-up policy. So a local policy can't supersede anything that's in a federal or state. But what happens is the federal and the state allows the locals to make some determinations themselves. You can't be more restrictive, or excuse me, less restrictive than what a state and the Fed gives, but you can be more restrictive or give other guidance in that. So one of the things that I'm going to encourage that when it comes out, the new state follow-up policy that's going to be out real soon, is to make sure that the local areas sit down and work with the LWIBs to update the local policies as appropriate. One of the things that in preparing for this presentation, we had a recent monitoring from Department of Labor at Illinois at some of our local workforce areas and for DCO itself. And so we had some items that's going to be mentioned from that monitoring from DOL. But we also got feedback from our local monitors, Tamika Chisholm and her team, and she heads up the programmatic and fiscal monitoring. And one of the things that Tamika noted was that during monitoring, and this is not picking out one specific LWIA, this is was recognized in multiple LWIAs, that local policies are not clear and or do not identify appropriate follow-up services or when follow-up services will be provided to participants. So that was a note that Tamika passed on. She also passed on along those lines that she being Tamika, that post-exit quarterly reporting of all participant earnings, if applicable, is not always consistent or not reported at all. And what this comes into, and we'll get into it into a little bit more probably on the 9th, but it's about supplemental wages. And those are wages that folks have that don't report through the Illinois Department of Employment Security. The only way they can get recorded is if a career planner is doing a good job following up and getting the documentation about those supplemental wages. So again, we'll talk about that later, but that's some of the things that Tamika noted. So again, it's really important that the local updates your follow-up policy when the state releases it. And then, of course, the career planners, you have to be aware of your local policies. It's one of the things locals do a good job of development, but sometimes it may not get to the career planner's hands, or the career planners hasn't been up to date on it. So you as a career planner, you have to get into your local follow-up policy when that's issued. And then again, post-exit quarterly reporting of participant earnings. It's really important that, especially if you're using supplemental wages, that we're keeping on top of that. Next, we'll speak about the career planner. And this is out of the federal guidance. It says it's the responsibility of the career planner to determine, in conjunction with the participant, which locally allowable follow-up service would best suit the individual circumstances. Now, this is going to go right along again with your local follow-up policy. A lot of times the local guidance will give you some details of expectations. And then an evaluation should be conducted to determine the appropriate follow-up a participant requires to be successful. And then follow-up should be provided as often as necessary throughout the required 12 months. But in our state policy, it states that at a minimum, it should occur at least every 30 days for the first 3 months, and then must occur at least once a quarter for the remainder of the 12 months. So that, if you think about that, lines with how performance is reported. It's reported on a quarterly basis. So when you're putting someone in follow-up, the first 3 months, you got to follow up with them once a month. And then after that, it's once a quarter for the remaining 12 months. Follow-up must be recorded in the appropriate case management system throughout the required 12 months. A follow-up is opened with a start date, but the actual follow-up activities are recorded within the case note section and on the exit control panel of the participant's record. So like for IWDS, and again, we're not going to get into showing the screens today, but when you open follow-up, it's just that. You go in and open a service up. But all your actions that you deal with the client, whether it's on the phone or through social media or them coming in for appointments or them bringing you documents, you're recording that in good descriptive case notes, as well as where appropriate when you get on the exit control panel at the end of each quarter to update as appropriate. Follow-up services and information obtained may directly impact your federal performance reporting and outcomes. So if we're not doing that follow-up, you have a good chance of missing some outcomes that could have been obtained by doing good follow-up. And again, I touched on it briefly, but this is so important for those folks who have supplemental employment. And I want to dig in a little bit more on what supplemental employment is. Many jobs that people have, they report their wages through Illinois Department of Employment Security. And we get that information for those jobs that report wages. It gets auto-fed into IWDS. So it really makes it simple to keep track of those wages. But some people, maybe they start their own business, or they work at a job that does not report wages through Illinois Department of Employment Security. And the only way we can get credit, when I say we as a state, you as the career planner, for the client to get credit for his or her work, is by recording those supplemental wages. And that's obtained by capturing a copy of their pay stub and recording as appropriate. And we'll demonstrate that on the May 9th presentation of exactly how we do that. But and then also for federal reporting for the youth program, if a youth is attending post-secondary education, he or she can get a positive outcome if they're doing that at the second and fourth quarter post-exit. Well, there's no way to auto-feed that in. That's only obtained by a local staff doing the legwork to get that information and updated accordingly. So again, those are things that without follow-up, it's impossible to do. Some of the things we're going to talk about is when does follow-up start, and how's it supposed to be accomplished, and things like that. One of the things that I hear often is, well, we have to wait till the client's exited before we follow up, and that's not necessarily the way things work. We don't wait till they're exited. What's going to determine when it's time to put somebody in follow-up? It's always going to be based on the client's plan, because when we develop a plan, we put an overall overall goal out there, and under that goal are objectives that we want the client to reach. Underneath that are the services needed to reach the goal and objectives. So once the client has reached his or her overall goal, and typically for an adult dislocated worker, it's finding unsubsidized employment, and then the objectives underneath it, and some objectives could be such as getting an associate's degree in nursing, another objective, getting their license. So there could be several objectives. But once they reach those goals and objectives, then, and if they've had their last service and no other service are planned, that's when they transition to follow-up. So it's not waiting for an exit, it's based on what's going on with the client. When the client's had all their services completed, no further services are planned, that's when we begin the follow-up process. Now, one of the things that's really important to understand also is that for follow-up, it's never going to extend participation. A lot of times people get concerned that, well, if I open up follow-up, well, the client's still enrolled in services, it's going to make them continue on. No, follow-up is not an enrolling service. So when follow-up's opened up, you do follow-up, and it's not going to extend the participation for the client at all. And again, how it works for exit, then after the client has not had a service for 90 days, that's when the exit will occur. It's kind of just automatic. It occurs after 90 days with no service. And then it's always going to go retro back to the last day of service. So it'll go back in time, the follow-up, or excuse me, the exit date back in time, 90 days. And so you have already done your first 3 months of follow-up by closing it after the last service has been completed and doing it once a month for those first 3 months. One of the things also in this slide speaks about is co-enrolled people. When a client's co-enrolled, that means they're in more than one title. Maybe it's a client that had been a youth and he or she got co-enrolled under the adult title to help pay for some post-secondary education. Well, if a client's co-enrolled, they can't be exited from one title until they've finished services in all titles. So maybe in this example I used, that youth had finished his or her services under the youth, but now they're getting service under the adults. So they can't be exited under either title until they're finished with all services. But once they're finished with the service under the adults, that's when we'd open up follow-up, and we'd start our follow-up, and then 3 months or 90 days after no enrolling service, that's when the client would exit and it would go back to his or her last enrolling service. So again, the purpose of follow-up is to ensure job retention, wage gains, career progress for WIOA participants who have entered unsubsidized employment. Follow-up services for an adult and dislocated worker participant must be provided for up to 12 months after the first date of employment for participants who have obtained unsubsidized employment. Follow-up services, as I touched on earlier, do not change or delay exits. Thus, they will never be entered as an episode of an enrolling service, meaning we record them, but they're not going to extend your participation. So we have a little scenario for us here. We have Clyde. He's a 29-year-old WIOA Title I-B participant enrolled in the last semester of a 2-year associate's degree in nursing program with an expected graduation date of May 13th, 2023. So Clyde's fixing to graduate pretty quick here. Now, Clyde has been taking his clinicals here at the local St. John's Hospital in Springfield, and they've actually have a program. It's called Hire While Completing program that effective April 30th of 2023, he has been hired to work in unsubsidized employment at St. John's Hospital. So the current plan is after graduation on May 13th, Clyde will study for the license exam. And then the plan is to assist with preparation for licensings, to assist with licensing costs. Under WIOA requirements around follow-up, any adult and dislocated worker that obtains unsubsidized employment must have 12 months of follow-up after being hired into that unsubsidized employment. So the question is, question number one, what is the best way to provide and document follow-up services in this situation to comply with the follow-up provisions for 1A and 1D at time of employment? So again, just think about this yourself, and I'll reveal the answer here in a moment. But you got a client, and many of you who work with clients have similar situations where your client's still enrolled in services, but they get unsubsidized employment. And per our legislation and per the state policy, you got to start doing follow-up. Well, the system's not going to allow you to open up a service of follow-up because he's still, in this case, he is still enrolled in services. So the answer is, since Clyde is currently enrolled in an active WIOA service under the adult title, the appropriate case management system will not allow a follow-up service record to be opened. When a participant has an open enrolled service at the time they enter unsubsidized employment, then the follow-up should be accomplished during normal two-way communication, which must occur at a minimum every 30 days. And this is a requirement through our career planning policy, because our career planning policy states that while a client is in services, there must be two-way communication every 30 days, and it must be recorded in the case notes. So if your client's working, I'm sure the common answer would be, hey, Clyde, how's your job going? The pay raise, what's going on with your work? So what we want to make sure to do is do a good case note about that. Explain and make it, use that subject line in your case notes. Entered unsubsidized employment, starting follow-up about his employment. Make it really clear. One of the things that we've found recently from a DOL monitoring is they didn't find it clear when people were entering follow-up when they obtained unsubsidized employment. Well, the best way you can do it is good descriptive case notes and starts that subject line. So and then how it works for this client is after the last enrolling service, so after he graduates the nursing school, after he gets his licensing exam, and after he has his last enrolling services, that's when you'll actually open up the follow-up service line. But we'll have already been doing follow-up all along in our normal two-way communication, and just make sure you're recording that each month at a minimum while it's going on. And to reiterate, to meet the requirements outlined under WIOA, that for any adult or dislocated worker who obtains unsubsidized employment while still enrolled in WIOA services, the follow-up will be conducted and recorded as part of the normal two-way communication. Adult or dislocated worker participants who do not obtain unsubsidized employment. If you think about this, these are people we still need to do good follow-up with, because these are people we've put in our program and they haven't found a job yet. Well, if you're an adult and dislocated worker, the primary reason or the main objective or the main goal we're bringing folks in is to obtain full-time self-sustaining employment. So if they haven't obtained that and we end up exiting, we still want to make sure we're conducting follow-up. But in some instances, these people might have disappeared on you, so it makes it more difficult. But again, if they're still in contact with you, you definitely want to do follow-up still. In such cases, that career planners should continue working with the participant to assist them in meeting their goal and objectives outlined in their IEP, which again, generally would be to obtain employment. But again, follow-up is not required if you're going to exit without unsubsidized employment, but it's highly encouraged by the state. And then of course, your local policy will give you more descriptive guidance on that. But it's still important to understand that that participant's going to be tracked through federal reporting for performance outcomes for the 12 months post-exit. Even if he did not obtain employment, you're still on the hook. The state, the local is for outcomes for that client. So it makes perfect sense to stay engaged with the participant to assist in gaining self-sustaining employment. So now I want to speak a little bit about some US DOL monitoring that recently occurred. One of the findings that was determined was exit dates were not based on the last date the individual was receiving an enrolling service, but what happened is exit dates were based on when a client told the career planner they got employed. What happened is the career planner went in and recorded that as a service, the conversation stating that the client got a job. Well, that's not a service. So it's really important to understand you only record a service if we're really providing a service. So when we're talking to our clients, and if we're not providing a service and they just tell us that they got a job, which is a great thing, we case note that, we begin follow-up about that unsubsidized employment, but we don't record that as a service. And that was one of the DOL findings, that people were recording that as a service when the client had just simply told the career planner that they had obtained a job. So that shouldn't have been a service. It should have just been recorded as a normal case note, and then recorded as this individual's unsubsidized employment. So it's important to always make that distinction of, am I providing a service to the client, or am I just giving information, whether it's just speaking about how things are going with a training class, or speaking about them getting a job, or am I actually providing a service, like giving them a referral to a job, or helping with a resume, or a number of other things it could possibly be. Some of the things that's in the service matrix that speaks about what we can do as part of follow-up for an adult dislocated worker: counseling individuals about the workplace, contacting individuals or employers to verify employment, contacting individuals or employers to help secure better paying jobs, assisting individuals and employers in resolving work-related problems, connecting individuals to peer support groups, providing individuals with information about additional educational or employment opportunities, providing individuals with referrals to other community resources. One of the things for an adult dislocated worker during follow-up is we're not allowed to provide supportive services. For youth, they are, if it's allowable in your local policies, but for an adult dislocated worker, you cannot provide supportive services. But you folks have a large network of a lot of people out there. So that's why being able to provide referrals for some other community resources, maybe low cost or no cost childcare, or lower cost transportation options. So again, we'll use you to help the clients through referrals, but you won't be able to provide those supportive services after the client's no longer, or when he or she's in follow-up. So again, trying to determine the difference between what's an active career services versus what's a follow-up service. So one of the big things is you're going to refer to your IEP, the individual employment plan. Again, you establish this plan at the beginning with the client and the career planner working together. It may have been modified over time, but all IEPs have to have an overall goal, which is tied to full-time self-sustaining employment, the objectives underneath it, and the services underneath it. So any service related that's provided inside that IEP that's leading towards that goal or objectives, those are services. Once you've reached all those goals, the overall goal, the objectives, that's when you transition. It's kind of a transition of communication. If we've helped the person reach that unsubsidized employment, there's nothing else to do with it. That's when we just transition to follow-up. So we got to kind of try to get ourselves mind out of like, well, we're going to exit this person, because it's really just a transition of communication. The exit's going to happen after 90 days, so 3 months with no service. That's when they're going to be exited, but you're still going to be in communication with the client once a month for the first 3 months, and then once a quarter after the first 3 months for the remaining 12 months. So again, the exit's going to happen as part of the process, but that's going to be after 90 days with no service. So let's talk more about some more details about those things again, the difference between a career service and the difference between the follow-up. So put together some slides here. A career planner who matches a current WIOA participant with employer and existing job openings. Advise to assist a job seeker in making occupation or career decision. placement or activities that occur during program participation. So these are all the things that we're doing while the client's in. Then there's a number of examples below that. And then go to the far right side, it talks about follow-up action. Assist with maintaining the job employment a former participant gained as a result of a participant in the program, which occurs after the last service and the date of exit is determined. And then it gives some examples: career planner working with both the employer and participant, assistance with work-related problems, a contact to secure better paying jobs, additional career planning and counseling. So again, always looking at your plan, the overall plan for the clients, and have they reached their goals within their plan, reached the objectives within the plan? And if they have, that's when we're transitioning to that more of the follow-up side of the house. Mark Burgess did an excellent job of doing some research on some of the things that can entail in those different ideas of items that can be done as part of follow-up. So this was the workplace information where this service could be used for general information, soft skills such as professionalism or work ethic, and oral and written communication, or collaboration of skills once a participant has entered unsubsidized employment. You know, a lot of times companies, they identify different competencies and networkings, you know, and they emphasize communication skills and teamwork and problem solving, critical thinking. So any additional assistance you can give a client around those types of actions. Sometimes, you know, folks, maybe they're wanting to move up in their current job. Maybe you can help them with ideas of how they can get promoted in their current job. And again, sometimes, you know, when somebody gets a job, it's kind of overwhelming for them. And sometimes maybe they need you as a sounding board, because you're a professional who's been doing this for a long time. You've encountered a lot of different situations. So you could maybe just be there to listen to them and provide them some guidance, or maybe just to listen to them in general, not necessarily even have to give them answers to a question. But maybe help them like this, talked about knowing appropriate attire for showing up for work, and if they had different types of functions, or maybe they need safety equipment, and discuss how to best to get that, or just a number of things. But these are things you're helping folks with while they're employed, so they're no longer active participants, they're in follow-up, but you're still giving valuable information to them. Employment verification, you know, we talk about times when, and everybody's seen it, when you have clients that disappear on you after you get done served. They're like, hey, thanks for your time, thanks for helping me, but I don't need you, so I'm disappearing now. Well, part of being in follow-up also includes verification of employment. So you could actually be reaching out to the employer and recording that under follow-up actions. If you have a good relationship, especially a lot of our business service reps, they have a lot of good relationships with different businesses. So maybe our client got placed at one of these jobs that our business service reps have a good contact. And even if the client's not responding as timely as we'd want, maybe somebody at the job can help give us verification of the client still working there and what's going on with the client. Upward mobility, again, you know, almost everybody is always looking to make as much money as possible. So when they start working, they're usually happy where they're at, but more than likely, folks are looking to move up the career ladder. And that's where your breadth of knowledge, you know, you have a lot of experience, and you can assist folks with what it's going to take to get promoted. Maybe speak to them about the different ways of trying to find better jobs within their own company, and the different ways they can could possibly increase their earning capacity. A good example that Mark Burgess put together here is an over-the-road truck drivers. You know, there's a tough job, and a lot of times the folks that take that job, they get burned out pretty quick. So maybe those folks who had taken the over-the-road truck driving job are looking for local jobs. So maybe they're going to pick your brain on things like that. And again, two-way communication with the employer. may assist in ensuring the participant is moving along an expected path to a promotion or identifying different occupations within the company. And again, that's where I have a mad respect for business services folks, because they have a tough job, but they're a great ally for career planners, and especially during follow-up. We can utilize their expertise to assist with follow-up also. Workplace mediation. There's problems that come up in work. Issues arise. So your career planner, you have a lot of experience. So maybe you can help talk through some work problems that somebody might be happening, especially initial weeks and months when a person just starts working. Assist individuals or employer that may help the participants succeed when different challenges arrive, if they're having problems with showing up on time, or maybe not get along with some coworkers or their boss. Just having you there as a sounding board to help talk with them. And then again, an employer might need assistance identifying additional training and guidance that maybe that they might reach out and ask for your expertise on it. And again, that could be part of what's going on with follow-up, is that relationship again with the employer that you or your business service reps might have. And this is something I've heard a lot about it, especially at the beginning of WIOA. And I think trade does a lot of this, but peer support groups, finding those folks who have been successful in WIOA and matching them up with other folks who are in follow-up and use them for their expertise. So it includes connecting those peer groups and employees with similar responsibilities and pressures, and want to discuss their professional growth and find creative solutions to problems and learn to operate at a higher level. So again, this is another form of follow-up, is connecting these peer support groups. And then this one here, connect to the educational, employment, and opportunities. In succeeding in the workplace or advancing in the career, a lot of times it's going to take a client continuing on education or at least professional development. So you got some good insights where you can help folks maybe with some of those opportunities. This may include information on educational opportunities to address newly identified tasks or technologies. So maybe occupations or licensing exams or certifications, identifying additional employment to meet individuals' personal needs, such as a second job, if that's something that's of interest to the person. And these are informational only in nature to identify appropriate opportunities, and do not include the provisions such as a WIOA service activity. These are things, again, that we're providing as part of our follow-up with the client. And referral, again, we touched on earlier. Again, you guys and your team at the local areas, you've been around a while and you have some good relationships in the local community, and you know a lot of folks. So if somebody needs maybe low cost or no cost childcare, maybe you have some contacts for that, or can give referrals for local community outreach community centers that have different types of services that can be provided. So again, being able to refer your clients, even though as for an adult dislocated worker, we can't provide supportive services, we do have the opportunity to be able to refer as necessary out to local communities. So again, for the follow-up, the guidance, after 90 days following exit, if a participant, now this is one of the downsides to it. I mean, I like this portion of the policy, but in not all cases is every client going to want to engage with you. So maybe you've done your best job as a career planner and the client just decides, I'm just kind of done with that WIOA program and I'm not going to respond to them anymore. Or they just disappear on you. Well, the policy tells you that after 90 days following exit, if the participant is not responsive, cannot be located, or refuses to provide information, the career planner may stop attempts for follow-up services and close follow-up service record with an end date. When that's done, the case notes must document the reason for the discontinuation of follow-up services. But if you think about it, since you've been trying to do it for once a month for the last 3 months, there should be a good case note chain tying together what's going on. A real important detail is you wouldn't want to update the IEP for your adult or dislocated worker because the IEP is an enrolling service. So again, it's essential that you're making these updates through your case notes, that when you're closing out the follow-up due to a person being unresponsive. You don't want to add a WIOA enrolling service, meaning you don't want to put career planning case management. You don't want to put part of the development of an IEP. It's just a traditional case note. And that gives you the ability to close out follow-up for those folks who have disappeared or just not responsive for you. Got another scenario for you. So we have Lisa. She's a 39-year-old WIOA Title I-D dislocated worker participant who has been enrolled in career services to assist with her resume and mock interviewing. And she's been referred to several different employment opportunities over the past month. At the current time, the last two-way communication between Lisa and the career planner was a job referral. So it was referred to employment/placement assistance back on March 28th, 2023, which will be the date that actually Lisa had her last service. The career planner, per the IEP, began follow-up on Lisa's employment status by contacting Lisa in mid-April to see how the referral went, but Lisa wasn't responding. And then April 24th, the career planner learned that from a mutual acquaintance that Lisa began working at the Best Buy as a member of the Geek Squad. So the career planner stopped by there on April 25th and chatted with Lisa and verified she's employment. And she just said she's been just too busy to follow back up, but they had a good conversation. And she said she started on April 17th and she's making $16 an hour. And she's on a 90-day probationary period. So Lisa's happy and she's really pleased with what's going on with her job at Best Buy. So the question is, what should the next steps be for the career planner to document follow-up and provide those follow-up services for Lisa in this situation? So again, it's a client that kind of disengaged from you, but when they see you as a career planner, she's fine telling you the business and what's going on with her. So what's the action we do? Well, follow-up services are required on all 1A and 1D participants upon unsubsidized employment. So the data follow-up service record should be opened on April 17th, 2023, and a case note should be entered that is the first date the career planner began providing follow-up for employment verification. Lisa does not have any open WIOA services and none are planned or anticipated. The IEP has been accomplished, so their exit from the WIOA program should be planned. The exit should not be entered in the system if it's determined that Lisa needs additional enrolling services for career or training services to stay gainfully employed. But if Lisa does not receive any other WIOA additional services for 90 days, then that job referral that you'd made is going to be her last enrolling service back on March 28th, 2023. So follow up with Lisa's activities may include offering assistance with communication with their managers to ensure success throughout the probationary period, providing advice about opportunities for pay increases, but after 90 days to probationary period, providing information about additional certification or certificate programs offered at Best Buy, offering assistance for understanding their benefits and long-term employment options. So some of the example case notes was a note on the 24th about employment verification, detailing that contact communication when learning that Lisa's employment, and document that April 17th date is when she started working. April 25th, the case note, the detail about visiting Lisa's workplace and the wage and employment information. And some other examples of follow-up that might occur, maybe on May 15th, some workplace counseling. June 14th, maybe a workplace mediation. July 18th, connect to education. Think about the probationary period is ended and asking about taking professional development courses offered through Best Buy. Those are just some examples of some different ideas that are put together of what could be possible. But again, it always goes back to when we've completed our services. In this case, it was on the 28th was the last, 28th of March was the last day that this example client had received the service. And then she obtained employment. So then we're starting the full-blown follow-up after obtaining employment. So we have another question answer. So when a 1A, 1D participant is participating in a paid work experience, WEX, can I start follow-up at the time their WEX employment started? And the answer to that's no, because follow-up may only be provided for a 1A, 1D participant after the date of unsubsidized employment. A paid WEX is a WIOA funded service, so it is not considered unsubsidized employment. Follow-up programs, however, programs are encouraged and they offer follow-up services to a 1A, 1D participant when the IEP is completed, meaning that the overall goal has been reached and the objectives have been reached in all services. So in this case, let's say that this person got that job, they've been working at the paid work experience, and they end up getting hired at that same place. Well, then it would make sense to transition, if there was no other services being provided, transition that client into follow-up. But as long as they're still being served, you wouldn't want to open up the follow-up. And then again, in this case, the client had not been hired full-time self-sustaining employment as of yet. So some other questions. Can programs provide a WIOA-funded supportive services to an adult and dislocated worker who have been exited and enrolled in follow-up services? And the answer to that's no, supportive services are not allowable for a WIOA-funded activity and follow-up for an adult and dislocated worker participants. If it is determined that the participant is in need of a career or training services within 90 days after their anticipated last date of service or the exit date, the exit was entered the system, the exit would need to be removed and the participant could continue participation in the WIOA career and training services. So this is taking the step that the client had just got exited at 90-day points, and then all of a sudden now he or she needs services again. Typically, what this would warrant, more often occur is maybe while they had been in unsubsidized employment, maybe they lost that job, and would it be allowable to put him or her back into services? And that would be, if a client was in follow-up and it hasn't been over 90 days, they would not have yet been exited. So if something happens where they need to resume services, then you just close follow-up and you'd start serving again. But if it was just, if you just wanted to try to provide supportive services, that would not be allowable to do. You'd have to put them back in WIOA services in order to do that. So now let's transition from the adult and dislocated worker into the youth program. Now, again, I spoke earlier how the rules, we have different rules for an adult and dislocated worker as compared to individuals that are youth. One of the things about a youth is all youth have to have 12 months of follow-up upon completion of their services. So that's different from the adult and dislocated worker. Another good portion about the youth is it is allowable to provide supportive services if it's part of your local plan during follow-up. So you have some other things you can offer for a youth that's during follow-up. But keep in mind, the goal of follow-up for youth is to enable the participant to continue their lifelong learning and achieve a level of self-sufficiency to ensure job retention, wage gains, post-secondary education, and training. Follow-up services do not change or delay exit, as they can only occur after the exit in the Title I youth program. A big thing to understand about the youth, sometimes a youth, we build these relationships, and they're in with a career planner for a long time, especially if they come in when they're in high school, and we have to have them in our services all the way through until they obtain that high school diploma, and then maybe we keep them on after that in some instances to pay for post-secondary. So a lot of times youth, if all of a sudden we say, yeah, we're going to exit you, a youth can be like, well, what'd I do? I didn't do anything wrong. So again, keep in mind, it's just a transition of communication. It's not, you shouldn't be using the word exit. Our youth, we have a plan for them. They have their overall goal and they have the objectives and their services. And once they've reached their overall goal and their objectives and our services are closed and no further service or plan, that's when they're transition that communication from enrolling services into follow-up for that youth. Now, follow-up again must be made available to all youth for a minimum of 12 months from exit. Follow-up may be provided for youth longer than 12 months if allowable per your local policy. Follow-up services should be reported on the date they begin, which may align with the youth date of the youth program exit. Activities and services provided during the duration of follow-up must be documented in the standard case notes. Program should run the report WIOA. This is a report out of IWDS. There's a report called WIOA Youth Exers Without Follow-up to ensure the follow-up has been opened for all youth after participation. I actually ran that on all LWIAs today just to kind of get see how we were doing across the states. And I was really pleased across the states. By and large, most all LWIAs are providing follow-up for their youth. At least they're opening the follow-up, because that's how that report works in IWDS. If the follow-up service has been opened, they don't appear on that report. But the numbers were really good as far as the number of our youth that's getting follow-up provided. So I was really happy to see that. Encouraging that the youth to participate in follow-up. You know, following maybe some questions to ask to encourage youth about participants to participate in follow-up. Now that you're working, are you keeping a budget laid out during active participation? Have you set up a savings account? Are you saving money? Is the job you attained what you expected, or you like to consider other employment opportunities? Do you know what other occupations are available? Does your current employment require you to seek further education or training to better? Oh, sorry about that. My slide's jumping around on me. Does your current employment require you to seek further education or training to better your ability to perform successfully? So here's another question. Transitioning from WIOA enrolling services into follow-up. When does a WIOA youth participant transition from being enrolled in WIOA services into having their follow-up services opened in the appropriate case management system? The answer, the participant should have their WIOA follow-up service opened once all objectives and the overall goal in the participant's individual service strategy have been met, all WIOA enrolling services are closed, and no further enrolling services are planned. And again, this is always going to go back to your plan. What's the client's plan? Have we reached it? Have we reached the objectives? Are they done with services? Well, that's when we're going to transition our communication from enrolling services into follow-up. Youth follow-up services are a lot broader than the adult and dislocated worker. Here's a list of things that could include, that may include, but are not limited to. Supporting services, again, if funding is available and the need for supporting services are supported by the ISS for the participant. Adult mentoring, financial literacy education, services that provide labor market and employment information, activities that help youth prepare for and transition to post-secondary education and training, and other services necessary to ensure the success of the youth in employment and in post-secondary education. Many of those allowable activities for a youth as part of follow-up services include, but are not limited to, adult mentoring, financial literacy education, labor market information, as well as supportive services are identified similarly to enrolling youth activities. So the question is, how would those activities be recorded in the appropriate case management system when the participant would receive one or more of those activities as part of follow-up services? Which is a great question. And the answer to that, when any youth activities considered enrolling youth elements are needed as part of the youth's participants in follow-up, the individual service strategy should be updated to include details about those youth activities being provided as part of the youth follow-up. The actions are then recorded in the case notes. It's really important to understand, remember I spoke how youth have different rules than adult and dislocated worker. For a youth, the ISS is not an enrolling service. So you can continue to update the ISS. So even if your youth had reached his or her objectives, reached their goal, all enrolling services are completed, but maybe they're in follow-up and maybe their car breaks down and they need some assistance in maybe getting transportation to and from school or work while the car breaks down. Well, if your local supportive service policy allows, you could provide that supportive service and just simply update the ISS to explain the circumstances and then record in case notes what you're doing with him or her. And again, this is different. You can't do that for adult and dislocated worker under WIOA, but it is allowable under WIOA for youth clients. Under WIOA, supportive service to the youth can be both a youth program element and a follow-up, as I just touched on. In both instances, however, the supportive services must be tied to another program element or a follow-up service and cannot stand alone. Supportive services are allowed during follow-up when they assist in the participant in achieving their stated employment and/or education goals or objectives. So that's what I spoke about when I said if the client was in post-secondary education or working, their car broke down, and now we're going to help him or her either get a temporary bus pass or even help, depending on what your local policy says, even help repair that automobile. But it's important, again, you have to look at the local board policies on supportive services, and they must address their utilization during follow-up before you can do that. Supportive services provided as part of youth follow-up, again, you always have to refer to your local policy. And then again, if it is provided, it's typically going to be when something happens out of the ordinary. We're not looking to continue providing supportive services for childcare or day-to-day transportation. It's something exceptional comes up. That's when we would do this. Again, any supportive services provided during follow-up must be spelled out in the ISS and detail the post-exit follow-up case notes. The ISS, again, is a non-enrolling service, unlike the IEP, which is an enrolling service for your adult and dislocated worker. So a question for you. Can a youth participating in follow-up services receive transportation assistance to the grocery store because they cannot afford a bus pass or taxi fare? And the answer is that no. Going to the grocery store is not an allowable youth program element or a follow-up service. Thus, transportation assistance cannot support such an activity. Now, one of the things that I spoke about early in this presentation is the new TEGL 0922 that came out in March of 2023. It speaks in there about providing food as a supportive service while clients enrolled in services. So that's what that blurb states. While food in limited situations may be provided at a reasonable cost, it must be to assist or enable an eligible youth to participate in allowable youth activities and to reach their employment and training goals. So it wouldn't be during follow-up transportation to go to the grocery store. Some of the things also from DOL monitoring, DOL observed reporting of adult mentoring for youth participants during participation at less than 10% nationally. And it spoke about mentoring is also something that should be utilized more than it is currently being recorded. So let us look a little bit closer at what adult mentoring on the next few slides and discuss the ideas to utilize this activity, not only during participation, but also while youth participant is enrolled in follow-up. 1 in 3 American people will reach the age of 19 without having a mentor of any kind in their life. Mentoring relationships between a young person and a caring adult can provide guidance, support, and encouragement to develop the competence and character of the mentee. It's a critical element under the WIOA Youth Program. The adult mentoring relationship must connect to the goals set forth in the participant's individual service strategy. Some details about adult mentoring for youth. It has to last at least 12 months and may take place during both the program and following exit from the program. Be a formal relationship between a youth participant and an adult mentor that includes structured activities where the mentor offers guidance, support, and encouragement to develop the competence and characters of the mentee, and while the group mentoring activities and mentoring through electronic means are allowable as part of mentoring activities, at a minimum, the local youth program must match the youth with an individual mentor with whom they interact on a face-to-face basis. One of the examples I use in my in-person training about mentoring, it was about a young person who was trying to get into the military. And they'd been working with a local guard person who was doing the job they were hoping to get within the guard unit. So that mentor was helping the person prepare for basic training, prepare for military, while they're teaching them about the potential job that they could get. So that was an example of somebody's mentoring. And again, it says it has to last 12 months, but the guidance in that TEGL 0922, it gives in there that it doesn't have to, you don't have to wait 12 months to start recording it when you're starting it. So maybe part of mentoring is the client's getting mentorship, and maybe the example I used to get in the military, and they've signed up for the military, so they're heading that way. But so we're going to end up exiting them, but they're still going to get that same mentorship from that person because they're going to be in their local guard unit. So they're still getting mentorship from that same person. So it's happened both during participation, and that same person could be getting that mentorship as part of their follow-up services as well. Here's a question for you, or a scenario. Jeremy is a WIOA Title I youth participant who received Financial Literacy Services Program element on February 13th, 2023, among other youth program elements, and completed an occupational skills training on March 10th, 2023 to become a welder. Then Jeremy became a welder, he became employed on March 27th, 2023 at a local welding shop. So Jeremy has reached all of his objectives and the overall goal in his ISS, and all enrolling activities have been completed and no further enrolling activities are planned. So the first question is, on which date should follow-up service be open for Jeremy? And then the second question, if Jeremy does not receive any additional enrolling youth activities, what would be the exit date for him when it comes time to exit? So in the question number one, in this instance, since Jeremy met all the overall goal and all objectives in his ISS, and all WIOA enrolling services have been closed and no further enrolling services are planned, the follow-up service would be opened on March 10th, 2023. Then for the second question, in this instance, since the last enrolling service was closed on March 10th, 2023, as long as there were no other enrolling service youth activities provided after March 10th, 2023, then on or about June 10th, 2023, which is 90 days after the last WIOA enrolling service had been provided, that's when the participant will be retroactively exited back to 3/10/23. Something I want to pass on, and this is right out of the WIOA legislation. And what it states in the WIOA legislation, it says the exit date is the last day of service. The last day of service cannot be determined until at least 90 days have elapsed since the participant last received services. The date of exit is applied retroactively to the last day of service. Services do not include self-service, informational only services or activities, or follow-up services. This also requires that there are no plans to provide the participant with future services. So again, it goes right along with this. So we've reached the goals, we start doing our follow-up portion of it, and then the client's going to exit, and it's going to go back in time to the last day he or she received an enrolling service. So WIOA provides multiple elements of financial literacy education, which can be provided during participation or as part of follow-up services. All elements must be made available in implementing a robust financial literacy program. However, determining which elements are provided to each youth participant is based on their individual needs. The focus of a financial literacy education may be quite different when it's a youth follow-up service, as they have entered employment, compared to when the youth program element when they were preparing to become employed. It's just a different mindset. when they're trying to get prepared, you can talk about money, but it's not the same as when they get that jingle in their pocket. So now they've got their first paycheck. There might be some different perspectives or different things that you can provide some guidance or some insight on. So that's why you're able to still do it as part of follow-up. Some youth financial things that can be taking place during follow-up is help support to create a budget, initiate checking and savings accounts, learning on effective management of spending, credit, debt, identifying theft education, teaching the significance of credit reports and scores, support to address the needs of non-English speaking individuals, and other approaches to help gain knowledge, skill, and confidence to make informed financial decisions and attain greater financial health and stability. Some of the things we also, that's a slide there. The youth LMI, labor market information, while in follow-up. Activities that help youth prepare for and transition to post-secondary education and training that occurs after program exits. Prepare in-school and out-of-school youth for advancement to post-secondary education after attaining a high school diploma or its equivalent, recognized equivalents. Could also include exploring post-secondary education options, including technical training schools, community colleges, four-year colleges, universities, registered apprenticeship programs, assisting youth to prepare for SAT, ACT testing, assisting with college admission applications, searching and applying for scholarships and grants, filling out proper financial aid applications and adhering to changing guidelines, or connecting youth to post-secondary education programs. These are all things that could also be done with the youth as part of the follow-up. If any of those youth activities that are part of enrolling services are provided during follow-up, the ISS would be updated, and then the case notes are recorded describing what was provided. No actual service element would be recorded if it's not considered an enrolling youth element and does not extend exit. It does not reset or extend participation required for the 12 months of follow-up. With all that said, even the best plans may change. So what was planned during the active service may need to be adjusted during follow-up. But still, understanding that when we transition to follow-up, again, it's always going to go back to that initial ISS. What was our overall, or not necessarily the initial, the ISS of the client? What was their initial overall goal? What is their goal? What was their objectives? Did they reach those? If they did, the services that are ended that helped them achieve that, that's when they transition to follow-up. So again, that plan is so important. For youth, opting out of 12 months follow-up period may occur at any time. The request to opt out or discontinue follow-up services must be clearly documented in the case notes. The final rule under WIOA allows a youth to decline follow-up services altogether. When that occurs, it should be an exception and not the rule. If all attempts and efforts to contact the youth occur in the document in the case notes, then unable to contact could be used and follow-up would not be required to be provided. And that makes sense. If you've lost contact with the client, it doesn't make sense to continue providing follow-up when you've lost contact with him or her. Because more than likely you've done all the things that you've searched the iBiz to see if he or she got a job. You've talked to family members and friends, talked to schoolmates, just trying to find the person. But if they've disappeared on you, it doesn't make sense to continue to do follow-up. Career planners should encourage all youth to participate in follow-up activities and avoid opting out. And my last little bit about follow-up, again with the youth, if you just think back to when you were young, you're a really a strong influence on this person's life. So I really don't like when we say, yeah, we're going to exit this person, because it can be a negative connotation. The person might think they've done something wrong. And it's not an exit, it's just a transition of communication. Because again, the exit's going to be based on them not having a service for 90 days. So if they've reached their overall goal of their ISS They've reached all their objectives, all their enrolling services have been completed. We just transition that communication into follow-up. So the exit's going to come when the exit comes after 90 days of no service. Just continue doing your communication with them. Instead of asking how they're doing in the training program, it'd be maybe now how they're doing in college or how they're doing at their job. And that's the transition we go through when we're transitioning after we've met the overall goal, the objectives in our ISS, and closed all services, no further service planned. Okay, we have another scenario here. Jeremy is a WIOA Title I youth participant who received financial literacy program element on February 13, 2023, amongst other youth program elements completed in occupational skills as the welder. And this is one we talked about earlier. He got that job. He's reached all of his goals. He reached all of his objectives. But on April 10th, 2023, Jeremy called in and he had questions about managing the income that he's now earning since he started getting paychecks. And they requested and were referred to the bank where they were provided a budgeting and retirement planning information on April 17th, 2023. So the question is, since Jeremy is now in follow-up, how should Jeremy's financial literacy services be recorded? And under WIOA Youth Title, it's allowable as part of follow-up services to provide financial literacy services. In instances when the financial literacy is provided during follow-up, the activity would be recorded under case notes. Because this service is being provided after Jeremy's program exit, it must be recorded as a follow-up service, even though a similar service could have been provided as a youth program element during the active participation. The difference is that during active participation, the financial literacy may be preparing a participant to develop a plan to address their financial obligations, including a budget prior to program exit. Whereas now that Jeremy has exited the program, the service is assisting them with managing those obligations and budgets. So again, now we're helping him with his money. He's got his job. He's having financial independence, but maybe doesn't know how to work with his money or budgeting. So that's where you can come in with your expertise and experience of life. So this is going to wrap up the first session on WIOA Legislatively Mandated Follow-up. But we also touched on some findings from the DOL monitoring. We also touched on common findings from DCO monitoring. We spoke about how important it is that when the state puts out the new follow-up policy that's going to be issued in the real near future, that LWIAs need to make sure they're examining their own local policies to update accordingly. If you have any questions, we're going to open it up now because we have a little bit of time. But if we don't get them all answered, we can also be able to submit them through the WIOA Title 1B Performance FAQ page. Try to keep them brief, general and brief and applicable to the WIOA representative. And then again, questions should not contain any participant name, addresses, or other PII information. Responses to questions or comments, the submitter will receive a direct email with a response from a general information from Illinois WorkNet email account, not from an OET. And then responses will be posted on the Title 1B Performance FAQ page. But that's questions later on. We're opening up now to any questions you might have right now too. Oops, jumped too far ahead there. The folks again who put together this, Laura Dom did a lot of the policy heavy lifting. Paula Berry and Mark Burgess did a great job. And then I threw in a little bit of information here and there myself. So that was today's presentation. So again, Kirsten, if there's any questions, we'll be glad to take them right now. You there?
I'm here, Jim.
Okay.
All right. So we do have some questions.
Okay, ask away. I'll put my camera back on since I don't have to hunch over as much.
Yeah. So We have some in the Q&A and in the chat. And in the Q&A, the first question is, if a participant is exited neutrally due to health or medical reason, does a career advisor need to open a 1 year of follow-up service?
You're not required to. If it's applicable, you could, but if you're not held accountable for performance outcomes, but depending on your relationship with the person, sometimes a person might be a neutral exit, and it's nothing they've done wrong. Maybe it's a medical issue, and maybe they're going to eventually come back to WIOA, and you have that relationship, so you can do it. There's nothing to preclude you from it, but you're not required to do that.
Okay, your volume is kind of
Okay.
again, Jim.
I'll get closer to it again. I'm going to shut my camera off so I don't look like I'm all hunched over it. So
Did hear that. It was just at the end.
Yep.
Okay. And then the next question is, if a participant has successfully completed their education goal, March 2023 HVAC certification obtained, for example, and have gained employment as an HVAC tech as of January 2023, can the participant be positively exited even if they express that they are seeking a different HVAC role? Or should they be exited after they obtain the new HVAC role and have been employed for 3 months?
Well, this is going to go to your overall goal depending on if it's a youth or an adult. If it's an adult dislocated worker, the IEP goal. If it's the youth, it's individual service strategy. So what's our plan say? Was part of our plan to get the higher certification, or is it just for him or her to complete HVAC and get the initial job? So again, everything should be always based on the plan, and that's where it's really important. I can't stress that enough, that it's got to be a mutually agreed upon plan between the career planner and the client. Everybody has to be on the same page. Because if we agreed that we're just going to get you through HVAC and get you a job, and then you're going to do higher education or the next step on your own, well, then that's our plan. So again, I'd go back to whatever that plan was, because that's how we're going to measure everything, is what did we say we're going to do, and did we do it? And then that's when it's time to transition. But again, plans can modify. So maybe the initial was just to get through HVAC in a job, but maybe you've had discussions, and it may be a higher local area too, because this is some local policies on, do you guys continue to pay for training for somebody that's reached their employment, so that's some of the local guidance to look at also. But it's always going to reiterate back to what is the plan, and that's when that client's going to transition from enrolling service into follow-up. And again, how exit works, we don't just pick an exit date. An exit date comes along 90 days after the client has not had a service. So we don't know the exit date. The exit date is going to be based on the last service the client had. Then they have to wait at least 90 days with no service other than follow-up. And then it retrobacks to, the exit date will retro back to that last enrolling service date, end date.
Okay. The next question is, should a client be CASAS, CASAS, or TABE tested prior to being positively exited based on employment?
Well, this is talking about post-exit or post-assessment testing. So if you need measurable skill gains, that's where the post-assessment testing comes into play. And there's a lot of factors going on. We give a pre-assessment test for all youth. They take both a math and reading test. But if they scored 11th grade level on their math and reading test, they're going to be at the highest, what's called educational functioning level, the EFL of a 6. Because that's how you get measurable skill gains, is by taking a post-assessment test and you raise the EFL. But again, if somebody has a 11th grade on both their math and reading, they're going to be maxed out. They're going to have the highest possible EFL of 6. And even if you gave them a post-assessment test, they can't go higher than the maximum of 6. So there would be no value to the customer or the local area doing that. But if your client has came in and they had taken a pre-assessment, either CASAS or TABE test, and their EFL on either one of those was below a 6, and you don't have a measurable skill gain, then there's big time value in bringing the person in to have them take a post-assessment test to get that measurable skill gain, because you are required to have a measurable skill gain on all your in-school youth once a year, all your out-of-school youth if you put him or her in a training program, and for an adult or dislocated worker if you put them into a training program. But there are a number of ways you could get measurable skill gains, and this is not a measurable skill gain training, but if the client had got a credential, well, then they earned a measurable skill gain also, so you wouldn't necessarily do the post-assessment test. So it's really going to be based on the circumstances of each individual client. Do you need a measurable skill gain? Can they get one from testing? And if you haven't gotten one in the specific program year, and they're open to coming in for a post-assessment test and they could get a gain from that, I would definitely see value in doing that. But one of the things you can also, as part of follow-up, you can even bring folks in to do a post-assessment test if they're open to it, and they can get a measurable skill gain that way up to a year after they've concluded services, and it wouldn't be considered an enrolling service. So it's another option. Kind of going down a rabbit hole there. Sorry about that.
All right. The next question is, a customer finishes occupational training and gets a job so a few days after. The last active service is the ITA service, so the date training ends is the exit date. Will the agency still get credit for the employment placement since it happened after the last active service? For what date would the plan and objectives be closed?
Yep, that's an awesome question. Everybody submitted that. Thank you. So that's a perfect example. So your client completed his or her training, and then a few days later, they got the job. So what would have happened is that last day of service will be that training date. And then I would think that the career planner had been still working with the client to help him or her get a job. But if not, if they just got it on their own, we would open up that follow-up service soon as that person got that job, because that's when we'd start. And yeah, you're going to get credit for that employment. Your employment, you can actually back into employment. Maybe let's say somebody even dropped out of training. We don't want them to do that, but if they dropped out and they got employment, you would still get credit for that. So the credit for employment you're going to get if they get a job. The problem is you won't get credit for wages unless they report through IDS, or you get what's called those supplemental wages, where you're capturing your pay stubs and you're recording them. And that's what we'll cover on the May 9th presentation about doing the steps of recording those supplemental wages and recording follow-up and things. But yeah, just what you said, you get credit for it. The last day of service would be that, in this example, would be that training completion, as long as you didn't provide any other service. And then once he or she started working, you'd start doing follow-up. And then 90 days after that last enrolling service, when the exit would happen, it would retro back to the last enrolling service, and you get credit for the employment as well as the successful completion of the training. Next question.
Once a participant secures employment, what is the timeline on when we can positively exit them? Can we exit them once they provide their offer letter, their first pay stub, or after 90 days of being employed?
Yep, not 90 days being employed. The exit date, you don't determine. When I say you, a career planner, even the career planner's boss doesn't determine the exit. What determines the exit date is going 90 days without an enrolling service. That's when the exit occurs. Like just right before this meeting, I was on a DOL meeting, and it was with the person's overall performance for the Region 5. And they said that people need to get out of the mind about exiting, because the exit's nothing that we control. Exit's controlled by the last date, or by a client not having an enrolling service for 90 days. So whenever a client ends his or her last service, they go 90 days without another enrolling service, that's when they exit it. So the goal is that hopefully on that last enrolling service, we've already had them help them get full-time self-sustaining employment. But that's where the exit's going to occur. 90 days after the last enrolling service will be the exit date.
Okay. You mentioned in passing during the presentation a T-goal that says when food is an okay service. Can you please use or tell the audience the T-goal number if you know it?
It's T-goal 0922. It's a youth T-goal that just got issued in March of 2023. So Teagle 0922.
Great. Once a participant secures employment, we already answered that one. Oops, sorry. For those with successful completion of WEX, but not secured an unsubsidized employment, and after 90 days of last service date has not secured a job, can we exit them as other services completed?
Well, you could, but I would go back again to what was our plan, because our plan shouldn't have been just to put the person in a paid work experience. We should have a plan for them to get full-time self-sustained employment. So what are we going to do with them besides the WEX? Because we shouldn't be bringing somebody in just to expect we're going to give you a paid work experience, and then you're going to get hired. Again, everything's going to be based on the plan. So look at the plan, what's needed to help this person get full-time self-sustained employment. Now, after 90 days, if we have no other services left, then yeah, they would get exited without a job. We hopefully are not doing that very often, because we bring people in, especially the adult and dislocated worker, for them to get that full-time self-sustained employment.
Okay. Couple more questions. It is 2:30 though. So if people need to jump off, the webinar is supposed to end at 2:30. I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. But Jim, we have a couple, just two more, I think, questions. You're able to.
I'll take them.
Okay. When would you close the follow-up line for Clyde, the scenario that you used in the presentation? 1 year after he found employment or 1 year after exit?
That's an awesome question. Thanks for submitting that. On this case, you're held accountable for a person for 12 months post-exit. So even though we're supposed to do our follow-up from after the first day after obtaining employment, to me, you'd want to continue doing follow-up all the way through 12 months post-exit, because again, you're held accountable all the way through. When I say you, the local area, you as a career planner for this client through 12 months post-exit. But by the books, after a year of him working, you could close follow-up and you've done what's in the regs for requirements. But just for good business sense, you'd want to follow up all the way through 12 months post-exit, because you're on the hook for measurable outcomes all the way through 12 months post-exit. But great question.
Okay.
And the last one.
If a participant's follow-up is closed due to them being unresponsive, will they still pop out on the WIOA quarterly follow-up report?
If you've opened follow-up and closed follow-up, they're no longer going to show up on that report. Now, I'm not saying just go in and put it in, because the whole intent of that opening the service of follow-up is to provide follow-up. But if you've opened follow-up and we've been trying to do follow-up, and I'm your client, Jim just disappears off the place bureau, and you close my follow-up, I shouldn't be showing up on the IWDS report of no follow-up, because you did provide follow-up. The people who show up on that report are folks who never had follow-up at all recorded.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Just a couple of housekeeping things as we close out. So I did just put the follow-up survey for today's webinar in the chat, and it will also be in your follow-up email tomorrow, as well as it should, excuse me, pop up as soon as you close the Zoom link. So if you have a couple minutes in your workday to take that follow-up survey, we would greatly appreciate it. And then I also want to put the registration link for the May 9th webinar, because it is not technically a Workforce Wednesday webinar like we typically do on Wednesdays. It is on a Tuesday due to the WIOA Summit being next week. So I hope to see you all there at the WIOA Summit next Thursday and Friday. But Wednesday, May 9th will be the follow-up to this webinar. Tuesday, sorry, excuse me. I just said it wasn't on Wednesday. Tuesday, May 9th will be the follow-up to this webinar. Here's the registration link in the chat now. And it is the same time though, 1 to 2:30. And then Jim, did you have any closing remarks before we exit out today?
Nope. I appreciate everybody's attention, and have a great day.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon.